In IPTCP protocol, we use ports, and they are different thing than the ports on the switch, as I was mentioning before, I think. Port numbers range from 0 to 65,000 more or less, but only ports with numbers 0 to 1023 are reserved for privileged services and designated as well-known ports. There is a list of most known ports that you use every day without knowing, or maybe you know, but let's assume that you don't. So you have port HTTP port 80. Every time you type some website in your browser is using port 80. If you're going to a website which has SSL connection, secure, using port 443. If you're sending files to the FTP protocol, using port 21. If you're receiving emails which are on a POP3 account, using port 110. If you're using IMAP, it's port 143. If you're using IMAP on secure connection, it's port 993. So as you can see, there's lots of those ports which you're using every day without knowing about them. But your computer, your system which you're using, smartphone, knows them. One very important use of ports is in NAT. NAT is network address translation, and that thing happens in a router. As I was explaining to you before, if you have your LAN, and then you have another LAN in another city and country, let's say, and then for them to talk with each other, you need a WAN and a router which connects you to the WAN, which could be internet, and a router. But how router, and a router is kind of a gateway between these private and public networks. And network address translation is necessary because on one router we have only one public address, and there will be multiple devices with different internal addresses connecting to that router. So router must somehow store information which device requested that information, and then when a response is coming from the internet, must send this response to that device. And that's why a router is using network address translation, and it's creating something what is called a NAT table. So basically you have that some internal device sending request to some, this is I think some IP from Google, so it sends to the router, which that's the gateway, which is router address. So that IP sends to that router request that it wants something from that website. So router stores requests in the NAT table and appends ports. So it gives that IP, adds the port at the end, and then you have a request going to the external public IP with that port. And then when answer comes, router has this information stored and is able to, when it gets answer from that, send it to that particular device for that particular system. So why you need a router if you have device? Because on this device, let's say it's a computer, you can have multiple different processes. You can have browsers, you can have emails, you can have TPs. Countless things can be happening. That's why you need ports. Then that information, port is basically additional specification on address. Like you have address city, country, city, street, and let's say it's an apartment block, and you have a gate number. But then you need apartment number, and that would be the port. So this would be full address with the gate, and this would be your apartment number in that particular gate in the apartment block. Something like that. That's probably the best analogy I can give you. And as I said, with this information to that from its public, then answer comes from that device to that public, and the router translates that information to the internal device. But why it is relevant for a contemporary CCTV? Because as I said, I don't want to go into depth with networks. I just want to say whatever we need to know for our IP systems, CCTV systems. So why it is relevant? Contemporary DVRs and NVRs can be accessed from apps and remote computers via the internet to view the cameras. You can have requests coming. So monitoring station can be connected to your DVR, NVR, or in business DVR, NVR, and happens remotely through the internet. So DVR or NVR has has an IP address, private. Then the router knows which it is, and what's happening. There's that NAT table in the router. You can add positions to that router in the NAT table and tell the router that if request comes to that IP with particular port, they should send it to another port in the DVR or NVR. So in DVR and NVR you have certain port which will be used, usually is called server port, which is used for external requests. So in your router you program, and then application which is sending requests from will be app or remote computer will also have use some port. So in the router you tell that if it comes to its if you will receive the information coming from the port X, you will translate it to the device device Y, and port, whatever port, different port is set there. They don't have to be the same port, like on a request from the application and server port on the DVR or NVR. But that's what it's used for. That's why we need to know about it, because when those requests come from the external applications, they will use port, and the router will then translate it to the proper port on our DVR or NVR. And that's all what we need to know. This could be, you have, for instance, a service called High Connect, which is using external, through which you can connect to your DVR or NVR from the apps. Or in many cases, you have a monitoring station monitoring a particular business, and an alarm happens, and they log into the DVR, NVR, and they just go to the cameras to see what is happening. Thank you.